Welcome to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese, a program that can help you become liberated in the modern world. Now, here's your host, Dr. Kevin W. Reese.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to meet God? Welcome to episode number 48. Today, I'm talking to John Scott. John was an atheist his entire life, never believed in any higher power of any form, until a fateful day in his late 20s when everything changed. He calls it a near-death experience, or NDE. He was in the wilderness, and he was accustomed to picking mushrooms. And one day he picked the wrong mushroom, a poisonous mushroom, if you will. And that sent him into an unbelievable journey that absolutely changed his life. He details it in a book available on Amazon called God's Mountain. And it's full of all kinds of details and information that he claims he was given by an incredible deity, a source, God. He was spoken to and given information about the history of the world. So hold on to your seat because we're about to go on a journey with John Scott. Welcome to the Peace Pod, John. It's a pleasure to have you. Take me to your late 20s. Take me into that wilderness. Take me into your mindset.
I'd been introduced to a new species by a Frenchman, and it was called the saffron cap. And why that mushroom is unique is because they're orange on top and white gills underneath. And traditionally, Kevin, anything with white gills underneath, you keep away from, right? So that's the primary visual indicator. Any mycelium expert, can go further, but I'm not a mycelium expert. So, and there's other spore print tests you can do too. Like, I don't go around spore printing mushrooms for the hell of it. That's not my trip. But I misidentified. I went camping, and at the time I would just left the Navy, so I was full on into art. I had a flatmate. His name's Glenn, an Irishman, and we used to go up to the Blue Mountains, which was west of Sydney. It's very picturesque, and it's phenomenal. It's like one of the seven, it's probably the eighth wonder of the world. I mean, it's just a beautiful area, untouched wilderness. And we would track up there. I was extremely fit. One particular time, I saw these orange saffron caps, and I thought, hang on, there's a whole stack there, But what I didn't realize, I only found out later, is that they were aging Amanita muscaria. They'd already grown to full bloom, and they were flattened out. They were quite large. And of course, with Amanita muscaria, they've got a particular identifier, the classic red mushroom with the white puffy, nodules on the top, which is part of the broken veil of the stem. And they've got white gills, they've got a white stem. So I thought, hang on, these, and I didn't even connect the dots that, all of the white broken veil bits on the top, the spotted bits had washed off because they were old. They were starting to age, and they do fade to orange sometimes. Now, with the Amanita species, I found out there's quite a few others that are deadly and they'll kill you. And I didn't find that out till later, but I ended up chucking these mushrooms in and cooking them up, and they were near the campsite. And of course, in hot, yeah, yeah.
How old are you when this?
I was about 29-ish. So I was, was strong, I was fit, but I hadn't had any, pot or anything like that since I was a teenager. So this is like a good 10 years, maybe more. But I'm glad I did, because I recognized that I was expanding, and I thought, holy crap, where did this come from? I hadn't clicked it was the mushrooms that I'd added. I had no idea. And I was really starting to expand. At my campfire, I thought, man, I'm expanding here. I started to panic a bit, But I thought, hang on,
So
I got to
you
ride this out.
so did you go into like a psychedelic type of experience?
No, no, it wasn't psychedelic at all. It was much more focused than that, because I'd had LSD, and I mentioned this in my book. As a kid, someone put some LSD in some stuff that I had, and that was a horrible experience for me. That was really hallucinogenic and too powerful.
Right.
Whereas with the mushrooms, it seemed to assuage the fear. There was no hallucinogenic strobing or other effects. This was completely different. It was like I was just expanding in this bubble, but fully aware of my expansion. So I'm stepping back from my mind, watching my mind go out, like watching the ship go off into the horizon, but I was on the ship as well. And I
You
thought, oh, this is something totally unique. I've never experienced this before, but it
you,
wasn't scary.
you became the watcher.
Yeah, the watch became the watcher and vice versa. So I
Mhm.
thought, okay. So I'd realized I had something. I still hadn't clicked. It was the mushroom, and I thought I better, before I get too whacked here. And I was like looking at the stars, and they were really. It was a classic quantum, non-local moment where I thought, I was like, I am the stars, and they're so close. I thought this is insane. And then I could hear crickets, and I thought, I am the crickets, and I thought I can feel them. And I could see my legs moving, and I thought, why are my legs moving? And they were vibrating, and as we know, crickets vibrate their legs. So it was very, very quick, very fast, and all of these signals coming in. So I said, oh look, I'm out of it here. This is really flash of, am I going to die? But I basically just hopped in my tent, Kevin, and kept expanding. And I went through nature. And when I say I went through nature, I literally became everything I looked at. Now, one of the saving attributes, I think, was my job skills, my skill set, because I used to be an airbrush illustrator, and I used to cut stencils out with a scalpel. And of course, what I realized later is this was one pointed meditation. I was focusing on doing these stencils, and I did millions of hours of this. I had a 10-year window where I was working with advertising, and I would had this incredible focus because my job entailed it.
Mm.
And so that enabled me to actually focus in on what the hell I was looking at.
Right.
Step back, watched, again, and I thought, I can control this. This hasn't got control of me, without being too controlling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
So I
does.
thought I can actually hold this vision. So I was actually able to stabilize every part of it. And I was seeing weird stuff, like it was nighttime, right? But I was seeing the earth swell and move, and then I was seeing how there was differential movement of this energy moving around the planet. And I thought, I'm looking at a whole year of movement. So I thought, what's this differential movement of the planet's crust? What's it doing? Where's that coming from? So of course you start to see the variables start to expand, and what I was seeing with the magnetic pull of the moon pulling on things and the sun pulling on it. And I thought, this is moving. It's like, this is a liquid. We got a ball of liquid we're sitting on here. And then I could go into the earth and see this magnetic connection, the iron core. And then I thought, boom, connected to sun, connected to planets. It's all magnetism,
Mm.
right? It's all geomagnetic energies working here. And I thought, far out, this is insane. Then the trees, I thought I could see light and toroidal spirals coming out, like toroidal fields connecting to trees and all life.
The Taurus field?
Yes, which is a very big one that seems to be happening in quantum mechanics at the moment.
Yes, I
So
had I had Santos Bonacci on this podcast, and he
right, okay, yeah, I know Santos. I've met him. I've actually met him. So I bought
yeah.
his CD. Hi, Santos. Hope you. I'm still paying you. He's a bit of a wild boy, Santos, but he's
Yeah.
got some good information. He's got some very good information, and
It almost sounds more like a self-realization, enlightenment experience than a near-death experience.
well, that's right. And so again, I didn't know what a near-death experience was, and this was only the initial phase, right? So when I realized I was being primed for something much greater further on into this, so I end up, I saw all the nature, the connection to nature. I saw the molecular biological structure of matter. There's no such thing as matter. I started to break down into what I saw was the quantum field. And I've noticed, like have looked at a few of Joe Rogan podcasts and a few other people who've had psilocybin, for example.
Hmm.
And I made a connection. And like I said, I've studied metaphysics. I've spent 20 years studying metaphysics and the subtle body system, which is really important to understand that aspect in terms of human consciousness. Now, metaphysics have been studied by the Jewish people prior to us, prior to Christianity, and it keeps going back through. I
Kabbalah.
guess it's, yeah, Kabbalah, and it just keeps going back through time to Egypt and early Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, all of these supposed mythological landscapes. My point being is once I put all of these jigsaw pieces together and I was seeing this, what I knew, I knew it was the quantum field afterwards when I read about the quantum field because it's geometric. And I thought everything has this geometry in it. So when, say, for example, Joe Rogan was interviewing Mike Tyson in a podcast, yeah, the toad poison, and I thought, wow. And Mikey said something really interesting, and he said, look, it really changed his ego and it changed the fundamental essence of who Mike used to be. And that's the power of these earth sacraments.
Yes. You know, I grew up a sports fan. Mike Tyson's completely different.
He's way different. I mean,
Way different.
I mean, here's a guy who used to pound faces into the mat, and then he doesn't want to even know that person anymore. He doesn't want to know himself
That's
how he
right.
used to be. He's had a major transformation, and I get that. And I'm sure Joe has, and many other people who've done these and had these enlightening experiences. So to paraphrase or bookend to where you said, was it an NDE? And this people do question me about this. And I said, no, not at this phase. It's only an OBE at this phase, out of body, and you're traveling through, what I would term just under the surface of five sense perception. Now, when I had reached out to the stars and gone through all of this earth stuff, and I saw the planet swirl and interconnection of, geometry, and I thought, oh my God, I was in the celestial body. And that's where a lot of people on psilocybin hit. They have this 10-minute hit on psilocybin and they see these crystalline waves and everything and crystalline structures. Now, I've heard Cliff High talk about that. He's another well-known person who's been into this, this side of consciousness. Jeremy Narby's another one. Graham Hancock supposedly has had a few experiences on ayahuasca, which I could go off on a tangent and break each one down because each one has an individual spirit, a mythology, a cultural connection, a shamanic root, an oral tradition that goes back to the beginning of time, and they all differ. So the one I had, and I don't know anyone who's had an NDE on Amanita muscaria, but it has a specific signature, a specific energy, a specific cultural paradigm that is all connected within that mushroom. Hence why I wrote my book. It took me a long time to piece this together, but I was still getting visions post NDE. So when I'd expanded out through this initial phase, I blacked out. Then when I hit the blackout phase, I was still conscious, Kevin, but it was just sheer black. I retrofitted that to what they call the void. That's where a space where there's no energetic imprint, there's no pull, push, there's nothing. You're just there in this black void. And it was the first time I was actually scared because I couldn't visually link to anything. There was nothing for my consciousness to grasp onto to say, oh, that is X or Y or Z.
Darkness.
So I've gone, where am I? Darkness, complete darkness. But then I realized there was a presence near me, a spiritual presence of something. And remember, I didn't believe in this stuff.
Right.
So I never saw it. I tried to look at it, in my mind's eye. I couldn't see it. But I felt comfortable with it. It was masculine.
And
Then,
at this time, are you bodiless? Like you can't see your hand?
oh, no, I can't see anything. I mean, I'm off in just this black void. I'm just this ball of consciousness
Yeah, it's
with
just
this, it's
straight
a
awareness.
360-degree. Well, I tried to see what this entity was with me, and it wasn't malevolent. It was definitely benevolent, and it was loving, but it didn't amplify love into me. This came much later. Everything had love in it the whole time, but this is when it got really powerful. I saw a gate and I thought, oh, what's that? And I could see it, but I'll never actually draw it or paint it because I think it's too sacred. And I thought, what is this? But I knew it was an entrance to something to go somewhere. So I said, this is it. Okay, well, I'm going to go. And I said, oh, what the hell? I remember saying it in my own mind. What the hell? Boom, off I went. As soon as I got through that gate, it was like this river of love, and it was magnetic. And I thought, oh my God, I know this place. It was instant recognition.
Mm.
And I attributed that to the silver cord that they talk about, but I
Yeah.
was traveling inside the silver cord back home. Everyone has one of these silver cords.
Mm-hmm.
They're permanently connected. It's like string theory. Every one of us is an individual crystal, and we have these strings passing through us, and then we have aperiodic, punctuated sections of consciousness, and we have periodic sections in crystallography, and you get into this, the light mechanics of quantum, and I've studied a little bit of that, which took me into the realms of, say, Islamic architecture, Iranian mosques and things like that, the Giri tiles, da da da. I mentioned that in my book.
Right.
So once that gets back to the celestial body again, and I openly question, I say, where the hell did those guys get those visions? Were they on visionary substances back then without the cultural, suppression that we have today through authoritative figures? They wouldn't have had that kind of thing back then. They would have been in caves, experimenting with these, substances. I'm only speculating here, because when you start to go historically and start looking, you do find loose ends of, mushroom temples and mushroom buildings in Turkey, little cities of mushrooms made out of the rock. So there's all of these leftover remnants of this mushroom cosmology. And I'm sure Michael Stamets, if he ever gets to see this podcast, he would agree with me, and would be in his area. And many people are asking, well, what is this bloody connection to fungi? What is this real connection to who we are? I'm talking internally, externally, historically, metaphysically, cosmologically. We don't know who we are. So I was starting to understand who I was just after this experience. Anyway,
That's why they call it self-realization.
correct. So I get to this light, this massive light at the end of this, what I perceive to be a tunnel going somewhere.
Mm.
And there's just this freaking light, and it's just full on love. I mean, you can't, I get upset because it's so emotional. You can't put it into words.
Mm.
It knows you. It knows you back to front, back to front. You can't hide. Everything that you've ever done in your life, it's instantly known without saying it. And I didn't have a concept of God. And I'm just there in awe, staring, and I'm trying to look into it. You can't look into it. Well, you can, but you can't see any discernible, again, it's light, not like the dark void before, but this is the opposite. This is pure light. And it's consciousness, and it knows you. And what I was getting was, I broke down the telepathic. There's like a form of osmosis. It's like a knowing, like, the sun's out, it's daytime. You don't have to cognitively say it. It's like that. And here I am thinking, I've been here millions of times before, millions. That was what popped into my head.
You're back.
Millions. And this is home. I thought, far out. This is like, what the hell is this? And I've still got no concept that I've had an end to here. I didn't know it was God. And I'm thinking, no, this thing knows more than me. It's just a knowing, you know it. So I said, am I dead? And it started to talk to me. I think the first one, I said, where are you? And they said, I think the first thing, it introduced me with two names, which I won't mention. And then I felt I was slipping, and it told me its name was Tem. And I thought, oh, okay, Tem. Because I tried to fight it consciously back to that first name. I said, and they pushed me back gently to this Tem. And this took me years to discern what was going on here, Kevin, because when you're dealing directly with telepathic downloads, I'm facing God here. I'm facing, this entity that we all read in a book. And we say, some people intellectualize it, they argue about it. But here I am standing in front of this phenomenal force. I had no background in religion. I had no concepts. I had no ideas about who, what, where, gender, none of it. I had no concepts of reincarnation or the cosmogony. I had no concepts of anything. I'm this atheist kid who's had this experience, pure epiphany, unbiased. I got no dogma, none. So I can't say, hey, I saw Jesus. I didn't see Jesus. I didn't see a man with a beard. I didn't see Muhammad or whatever. I just saw this pure light. But I
Mm.
knew it was so pervasively knowing. And I felt like I knew straight away. This is all the knowing part, aspect of confronting this, that it knew everything. It was like a baby, but it was like the oldest entity ever. Both of those it was a conundrum. Both of those paradoxes melded into one.
Mm.
And so just that alone opened up a whole philosophical treatise in me later to try to explain, this is about, well, who is God? What is God? What started it? Where did this all begin? Is there something outside of this light? Because I tried to look through it. No, there's nothing outside of it. There's nothing beyond it. That is the end result, but it's also the beginning. It's beginning and end. It's everything. And it's like, how did this start? I mean, I'm still asking questions 30 years later.
Mm.
How did it start? Where did the first one start? How did it become self-aware? How did it manifest into humans and entities? And so I thought, okay, I've got something big here, right? It knows me. So I'm going to start asking questions. So I became the watcher. Oh, this is really weird, but I'm still in a subjective John, okay? I'm still John. And I said to it, I said, well, no one's going to believe me. That's what I said. I remember it like yesterday. That no one's going to believe me. I said, and I already asked, where are you? And they said, well, we are here. We are everywhere. They said, they used the word we.
Mm.
And I thought, they said, we are everywhere. I said, but I don't, and they knew I didn't understand. Like, it was like a microsecond. It's quicker. It's instant. So they hit me with this merge. Instantly, it's like I became the whole everything. And it's like, that's the ineffable. I thought, this is beyond comprehension. You can only experience it, but you cannot verbalize it.
No, it's 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, on steroids. So, so I'm thinking, okay. So I said, look, my head started to swell with questions. And I said, am I dead? Or am I sick? And I got no answer. I said, and so I thought, okay, think quick, John. So the first thing I asked was, what were the pyramids used for? Because I thought, well, there's a mystery. So what happened is they give me this answer. And they said, well, people used to communicate with entities all throughout the universe. So I thought, entities, ETs. I thought, because they use the word entities.
Mm-hmm.
So then I get this telepathic vista, and it started off slowly at first. And I understood what was going on. They took me to the time when this was all set up. But they took me back further because, yes, that was when we had a high civilization. And a lot of Masons are excited about Egypt, a lot of
Yep.
secret societies. I mean, we all know this.
Yep.
And, a lot of them still practice, what I would call the watered down death rites. And here I am having the death rite. I thought, oh my God, I've seen instantly what's gone wrong with the loss of the death rites. We became disconnected from the one, and the one is, back then, structurally and hierarchically, religion was set up in a pyramid system with a pharaoh at the top. But that pharaoh was all power and no power. They had no power. They were merely a communicative device. They were a hollow bone, and they were perfectly in tune with nature. And I'm going back not just 6,000 years. I'm going back 400,000 years. That's how old that Great Pyramid is. And that's why I called my book God's Mountain, because it was the original God's Mountain.
Mm.
So, and we hear stories. I mean, there's still residual stories about thunder and lightning coming from the top of the mountain. Well, even technically, and I've exposed what the Great Pyramid is in my book, technically, the pyrotechnics coming off from storms hitting the capstone of that pyramid whilst it was functioning would have been phenomenal. Like a Leyden's jar, you would have had, like a Tesla ball, you would have had these lightning ionizing the atmosphere above, and then boom, these storms would come in. And of course, the thunderous mountain, you're talking about a piece of technology here, so advanced. It told me what it was. I asked, and it told me. And they mentioned the word particle accelerator. I had no science background. Thinking, what the hell's a particle accelerator? I'm thinking. But they let that loose end for me then to go and research. And of course, 10 years after my experience, I'm looking up particle accelerators and donut plasma, fields and atoms being blown at the speed of light. I mean, it's really technical stuff. And then they built CERN in Switzerland. So I went right down that path of looking at collisions and colliders and fusion and fission, and I had to learn a bit of basic physics off my own back.
Mm.
But metaphysics is the same internally as the physicists are looking externally, and we've kind of reached this impasse where physicists have found the boson-Higgs field. What they've found is the barrier, the light barrier. That's what they've found. They've actually found the edge of our light barrier. And I don't know if I explained that well enough in my book, but this is incredible because it's like they know it's there. They've seen it. They've seen the effects of the boson, particles. But it's a field. It's much like an electron field that surrounds an atom. It's there and it's got this discernible shape. But breaching that field, the only way you can breach that field is through a near-death experience in metaphysics. Or externally, you hop in an ET craft and you fly faster than the speed of light. So external, internal, they merge, they marry.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. How long did this
Yeah.
experience last? Clock time, would you say?
Millions of years in my head, mere days in real life. So I wake up dehydrated and I've gone, holy crap, I've spoken with something here, and I didn't know what the term near-death experience was, because that wasn't in my field of interest. So of course I rock back to my local village, Manly, and I'm saying, I've spoken with the light. I've spoken with this thing called TAM. And I'm like rabbiting on like an idiot. trying to
Right.
like the madman in the wilderness, just running around. People say, oh, John, you've lost the plot. What's going on with Johnny? He's lost the plot. Now, there's some things I can talk about and some I can't because they're too personal, but during the experience, something major happened. And of course, my consciousness changed then. And within 7 years, I'd say post NDE, so I'm getting into mid-90s, 95, 96, I started getting hit with visions, and it all started flooding back, but it got worse in 2012 for some reason. I was working with crop circles and got some very interesting information. And I'd been told that there were entities throughout the universe. Deity told me this. So personally, yes, there's millions of ETs out there. What I hadn't realized, but what had been shown to me in the near-death experience, because you've got to remember, when they're pumping this telepathically directly into your soul, and you can't cope with all that information, it's like just getting, like rammed down your throat, and you're gagging on it. That's what was happening with me. So there was this slow release. So I was in an altered state for 20 years. I was in an altered state, and I'm just getting download after download after download after download. And I was writing them down. And I wanted to put it sort of in a book format back then, but I'm not an author, and I didn't consider myself a writer. But the downloads were coming so fast and strong that I didn't have time to actually collate. I was just writing it like a diary. And these were big realizations. Sometimes there were visions about the future. Sometimes there were realizations about interconnection of philology and language, Sumerian, Akkadian. I was going back through language groups and just getting these amazing downloads. And so I tried to contact especially rabbis, a couple of rabbis, because I grabbed the Bible by this stage and I'm starting to read that because synchronicity.
Right.
And I was much more logical than that. I had a very logical application. I was a businessman.
Right.
So I started reading the Bible, and I ended up in the end, and I'm pretty fastidious when it comes to study. I had something like 8 or 9 Bibles, and I'm doing transliterations, and already I'm picking up problems with translations in differing books. So I thought, hang on, I need to get to the root source of papers, original documents. Impossible. You don't get original scrolls unless you're a Dead Sea Scroll scholar or something like that. Right. So this is the technical problem of getting truthful historical information, is if that information is held in secure hands, then, and so traditionally I'd learned also that say, for example, Moses and Jesus and all and Muhammad and all of the old patriarchs in our old books, they used to disseminate this kind of information orally. This is what oral speaking tradition, master-student relationship was so important. And once that got fractured and broken through priesthoods, etc., and wars and whatever, all of those severances of Gnosticism were broken. And this is where, possibly shamans came into play. And they would, get these epiphanies, and then they would share, and they get direct source from light. So I don't know how far I can go with this, because it sounds I've hit a few subjects already, and I'm just rabbiting on with so many subjects.
Well, it sounds like you have this amazing experience that puts you into a seeker's stage. You start seeking, you start studying, you start connecting tons of dots.
Yes.
And then you're getting visions and downloads, and you're 20, 25 years of just like this culmination, this.
Yeah. It was like having a professor putting you through a PhD. You've got your, what do you call it, your advisor, your supervisor. And that supervisor's got all the knowledge that you need. Like, he's the supervisor of the university. And it's like my supervisor was the light. And I realized that I wasn't going to get led astray here. It was, upstairs was really giving me the bee's knees. That book, not that one. This, that, go and study that. So I was getting a really solid grounding on, how science works. I've got friends who are professors of molecular biology and, people in other fields. And we talk intimately about how science is structured. And of course, there's ego involved, and the grant system, and who funds it, who gets the funding, who gets peer-reviewed papers, what gets considered, peer-reviewed and accepted as true science, but it's still not a perfect science.
Do you think that Tim was the name, right? Tim.
Yes, T-E-M.
Tem, okay, T-E-M. Do you think that Tem, which is the name they gave you, do you think that was the God, or
well, okay, that's a good question.
God?
No, it was the God, but due to the structure of the universe, you have to see where we are in the bigger picture. We are primates. We were genetically engineered from ETs, so we still have half those 4 circuits.
Anunnaki?
Anunnaki, that's a word play. It's Anunkahe, or just Ankh for short.
Mm.
So the Anunnaki was attributed to the Sumerian, gods. And when I tried to talk to Michael Tellinger, that's a lot of people are into the Sumerian history, and they talk of the Sumerian kingship going back 230,000 years. And this is all, standard in the texts of the Sumerian tablets and stuff. A lot of people don't attribute that Egypt also has a mythology of kings, and it has a massive mythology of a timeline here, and that goes back hundreds of thousands of years, like Sumeria. So these two cultures are pretty much, you've got the Sumerian basin, and they've got Egypt. And I was shown that Egypt back then, where the pyramid was lush rainforest. So the demograph and geology was completely different to what it is now. It's a desert now. But back then it was lush, and we had salt water. And I explain this in my book, how the water level came up to the doorway of the Great Pyramid, which is 17.5 meters. So to answer your question, I will come back to Anunnaki. This is why I wrote the book, because the original schism, the original split at the highest level of the priesthood, which is it's the narrative of the fallen archangel Lucifer. It's still in the Bible today of, the sons of men came into the daughters of women, and you've got to sort of splice together these little anecdotal bits of scripture, but you've got to splice it into what was actually going on back then. What was the hierarchical structure? What was the social structure of the priesthood? Who controlled, the world, the known world back then? And it was a very, very high civilization, trust me. As I said, you get a Great Pyramid that's a particle accelerator. You're talking about advanced machinery that we've only just built 400,000 years later. Who helped us build that? Who mapped it? Who made it? There's a lot of questions.
Sure.
So the Anunnaki, or Anunnaki as some people call them, Anu is an anagram of Nuar, which is Noah. So Ark, you even get Enki, Ankh, hair. It's like you've got to know your deities. You've got to go back and break these words down
And
into their.
Enki, Enki, and Enlil, right?
That's right. So you've got to go back to the original language. And of course, it's frustrating if you're not a philologist or you're not an etymologist. So I was getting this stuff in downloads, in direct downloads from Space. So what does that mean? What's Chomish? What's this? What's that? And of course, and I'd get succinct telepathic prompts, and they'd say, look up Hebrew, like just Hebrew, remove the vowels, and then I'd search that and think, boom, got it. Okay, so I'd go back to the original deities and get it that way. So I've got like loose threads that have remained in religion, but they don't know the origin of it, if that makes sense. So once you get the name of something, you can take it back to the origin of what that deity was. And most of these deities are in your consciousness. They're all aspects of your subconscious mind or aspects of your emotional, mental, spiritual bodies. There's nothing outside of you. And this is when we start to get into philosophical rants about, well, we are God as opposed to a God being external and separate as a dualistic entity. I was looking at God as a dualistic entity. That's why I asked it, where are you? Separate. And they said, we are everywhere, incorporative. Makes me part of it, makes you part of it. So you see, the dialogue straight away is completely oxymoronic when you come from a dualistic concept. And when we work with linear time, we have linear constructs of knowledge. No, when you get this holographic dump, it's like, how do I put that into a mindset that's stuck in linear, horizontal, when mine was vertical and holographic? It's all of it. That's complex because it does things to the chemistry in your mind. You start to think differently. So my biggest problem was actually, as I took down the notes of my downloads, was actually trying to put these into a framework, an etymological linguistic framework that people could understand. Because we are empirical, we like to mount information one on top of the other in a slow stepping process in an augmented way, if that makes sense. This is what PhDs do. They jump off the masters of, get on the shoulders of masters and they move forward. That's how knowledge moves forward.
Right.
But when you're dealing with this kind of consciousness, it's like, wow, you're getting stuff PhDs would die for. You get the epiphany, you're getting the answer, but then you've got to reverse engineer the answer.
That's right. What you described, standing in front of Tem and God and talking and being in this environment where it's just all love and all glowing. This was described by Paul Twitchell.
Who's Paul Twitchell? I don't know Paul Twitchell, sorry.
He has a famous book called The Tiger's Fang.
Okay, I've never heard of it. Okay.
Oh, you're going to love it. And he started soul traveling as a kid.
Right.
And then spirit would come to him and take him on journeys. And so he went through, I want to say 7, but it could be 12 planes.
Okay.
And what you describe is similar to one of the chapters in that book when he's talking to.
Okay.
Because each plane, according to him, has a god, a figurehead, a governor.
That's a good point. And no, you're correct. And I think in ancient Judaism, for example, which I love the esoteric Judaic material, because I think the problem is we're so fractured into beliefs with 3 great religions.
Right.
I'd really like to see an interfaith dialogue, but on a mystical level. I want to see Sufis get in with Zadkikim and, get in with mystical Christian, scholars, or just mystical Christians, not necessarily scholars, but those who do know their scriptures, and they can have the intellectuals who know the scriptures. They can say, what's that scripture? And then boom, because the mystic can gnostically paraphrase this stuff. When you get into these inner circles of mysticism, it is an exact science, but it's not as exact as we would like it, because the experience, as you said, you mentioned this other author, we've had a similar experience, obviously. It would be great to get us sitting together talking about these levels and planes, because I paraphrase them as the 7 subtle body system, which connect to the 7 chakras, which the 7 chakras are really your menorah
Right.
candlestick in the inner
Right.
court of the tabernacle. So all of those symbols, all the symbols that you get in the tabernacle, which is a very good map of human consciousness. You've got the outer court, inner court, and holy of holies. And of course, only the high priest could go into the holy of holies and do the complete ablution of ego, or abolition of ego, get rid of the ego, and he would talk to God directly on Yom Kippur, or the holiest day, you know.
Mm.
And this was, of course, the ultimate blessing to get rain to come down, fertility for crops, and for the stability of society and the community, and blessings from God. So this is why rain was always connected with blessings. This goes back to Egypt too, with the flooding of the Nile and the fertility of the Nile and the crops, and so it was all connected to crop growth and just balance of natural forces, the natural world. And somewhere there's been a severance, and they've tried to paraphrase that as paganism, that you're worshipping the earth. And maybe we can go back to the Garden of Eden when we fall out. That man's punishment is to till the earth. So anybody who was connected to the earth was in a punished or in a sinful, fallen state. Hence, the Vatican would interpret that as, well, they must be saved and lifted up. Get them
Right.
away, those earth tribes, get them away from swanning around in the dirt and, doing all those pagan ceremonies. No, they weren't really pagan ceremonies, because I've done a bit of research. I've met elders here and I've visited sites. Same with Native Americans. They're giving gratitude for what the Creator gave us in the first creation, the first 7 days. It's their gratitude prayers. They're not worshipping it as a deity. The difficulty is when you're dealing with dualism, or what they call iconography, or idol worship. People need that focal point to get them to that sense of worship. So of course they're going to put a Jesus on a cross, or a Tanka painting of a deity in Hinduism, or whatever. They need that
Right.
focal point. And once you get beyond needing those focal points, and Judaism is correct that God has no form. I think Islam has the same with Allah. They say God has no form. So we've got these intellectual arguments going on between religions that originated from the same source. That's
Well,
just my.
I think one of the key things that you just said is that God has no form. And if that's true, then we have no form because we were made in that image. So people
Well,
get
it's
it
funny. Well,
people
when
get
they
it
talk
confused.
about, and you'll read in my last chapter, chapter 17, when they talk about this made in our image, and I note the term they use, our, plural. This is where the knowledge of the sacred sacrament, the Amanita Muscaria, which I found out from John Allegro. I was guided to his work. He was a Dead Sea Scroll scholar. He was considered blasphemous. His book was banned in the 70s, and he ended up, basically having to write the material outside of intellectual circles. But it created a massive furor and a storm, because he was a linguist, and he wasn't, this crazy, fringe psychopath, psychedelic imbiber. This guy was an intellectual. So I got his rare book and I read it, and there's a few things I'm not happy with it, from only from my own experience. But when that passage, and you'll note in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, that there's a conflict because mankind was already made. And I mentioned that in my book. They were already made, man and woman. Then in Genesis 2, they go into this elaborate Adam and Eve story of how, it's actually reverse creationism, where a woman is brought out of a man. And so I thought, this doesn't make sense. But of course, I get a vision by this stage, and I realize they're talking about the growth pattern of the Amanita. The our image ends up as the ground, the intellectual structure to restructure that passage into the mushroom. The mushroom has dual gender. And this, I covered a little bit in my book about this, about the stem with the skirt, with the veil, the broken veil on the Amanita. That specific mushroom was, or is, the sacrament. And so they've got the female at the bottom, and they've got the dome, which is male, on top. So there you've got our image. Now, God's not a mushroom, of course. God's not a mushroom. But the closest we can come to as we climb or ascend through our consciousness, we do have these subtle conundrums or archetypes. And once you understand these in terms of passive and active or feminine and masculine, you can then decipher these stories, these allegorical stories on the subtlest aspect of consciousness. And I'll explain. So Eve is enticed by the serpent to eat the fruit. It's not an apple because they don't mention an apple. The fruit are the fruit on the tree of life. So the serpent is the lower ego. So Eve, even the word Eve is not, we assume it's a female, yes, but Eve, or just V, is vor, the feminine passive aspect in the tetragrammaton in God's name, Yod He Vor He. So the Vav or Yod He Vav He. So the Vav or the feminine is seduced, and this is where choice is. You have choice. Hey, do that negative event. No, I don't want to do that because that's the tree. If I touch that negative event, I start to descend down through the spheres of consciousness and I fall into time and I fall below the veil. So they even term these terms, the veil. It's on the mushroom stem. So once you fall below the mushroom stem, you are trapped in time, and this is all connected with Kabbalah. You've got the planetary correspondences, and you have to understand the role of Saturn and the planets in each role in all of these ancient rituals. And they were well known, Kevin. This was a hard science. They were well known, yeah. And so we don't have equivalency in modern psychology, and this is what I struggled with. So this is what we struggle with when we try to find the equivalency in modern science to some of these higher metaphysical states.
Right.
And I really struggle with that, delivery, I'll be honest. And so this is why we can only go by oral and talking and telling people they do exist, but they may not exist for you the same way as they will for me. If that makes sense.
Right. Have you gotten, you said you've had visions through the years, but have you ever gotten back to Tem, the light God?
I'll give you a secret here, something that I've realized. I can only speak from my own subjective opinion. Once you make that connection on that vibration, it's never severed. You're not permanently talking to it, but you get this residual echo. You get these what's the word? It's like a leader. And I get anxious, and then I get hit with, it might be a voice vision. And I go, oh, and I think, here it comes. And I get very anxious, and then boom. And so I write it down. And I know it's not going to be the only one because my mind is still quite fragile in receiving this information. I might get 4 visions over a period of 2 months, and they all overlap, again, like a holograph, regarding events that are going to happen on the planet. So yes, I still get these. It doesn't say I am Tem like it did in the initial contact. But I know it is that energy because I'm permanently connected to that vibration. Once you attain a vibration, you can't not disconnect. You recognize it. It's like a law of recognition, if that makes sense. It's like your mother. Your mum's on the phone. You don't see her face, but you recognize other attributes of, her voice. And even if her voice has got a cold, you still recognize something deeper, like an energy underneath that. That's I know it's my mum, even though it doesn't sound like mum and I can't see her. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I had a gentleman on this podcast named Ken Fresky, maybe 20 episodes ago. And he also had an experience, and these visions and voice visions that he got,
Yeah. Yes.
actually, he ended up writing his book through that.
Right.
So his book isn't even his words.
Correct. And this is a really good point. And I'd stress that it's not about me as John. John really doesn't exist. On an absolute level, Kevin doesn't exist.
Right.
This is just this envelope that we've chosen, the color of our skin, where we've chosen to be born, New York, Sydney. I mean, all of those factors, and that's just a few small ones, but the variables, you've got karma, you've got gender, you've got race, beliefs, conditions, all of these things come in, and your mind or my mind could not fathom the variables to make an active choice. I want to choose that incarnation because we'd all want to be rich and swan around on a yacht with a couple of lovely girls and have daiquiris and swim in aqua water for the rest of our life and not have to work another day.
Right.
The fact that you became a doctor, for me, I was military and then I just surfed and did my thing and was an artist. So we pre-choose it, but we're not always cognitive of those pre-choices.
There's a famous book called A Course in Miracles.
I've heard of it. Yeah, I have heard of it.
And that book was supposedly written the same way. The woman was receiving voice messages from who she claims was Jesus Christ himself. So
correct. So look, do you have any beliefs, like religious beliefs yourself? I mean, I know that's a personal question.
No, I got rid of my beliefs.
Oh, okay. So were you brought up religious? Was that?
I was brought up half Jewish, half Christian, if that makes sense. Like split family.
Yes, it does. You have to get back to the metaphysical structure of who we are, and this body was called a guff.
That's right.
And so you were actually born into a hollow vessel. And I've read the book of Zohar and the book of Spheres and all of that, and they explain it brilliantly. So here you've got a perfect book discussing about the very thing I've experienced, right?
Yeah, the Zohar is fantastic.
The Zohar's fantastic. It is. It's a great book. I've got the 3-volume version. And I'd suggest to any reader, my God, if you want to know about near-death experiences, go and check the Zohar out. So I was struggling with big concepts like Zimzum and things like this. And, Zimzum is the contraction. And they've got these certain rabbis, 600, maybe 1600 years ago who used to debate this stuff. And, there's a few guys like the Goa and a few big names. I would really love to talk to some of these rabbis who are really out there. If we could, because they got some brilliant bloody insights,
No, I hear you. I was just studying the Kabbalah just a few weeks ago. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. And it for me, obviously some of my heritage goes in that direction. So
yes,
it's pretty cool, but I'm more into the Buddhist side, but
well, you'll find that Kabbalah and Buddhism are very similar.
Oh yeah, the Shekhinah.
Yes,
right?
The feminine. Yeah.
And emptiness. The concept of emptiness.
Yeah.
And also another that I've studied that I love is Meister Eckhart on the Christian side.
Yes.
So for me, John, I grew up, like I said, in a forced religious structure.
Yes.
But by the time I was 18, I got rid of it. I denounced it. I went full agnostic, and I was studying the Anunnaki, and I was into I was into the aliens created us stuff. And then, in 2011, I had an experience. I had, I guess, what you would call a Satori in Zen.
Yeah.
It wasn't as deep as yours. It was just a feeling of I am not my body, I am not my mind. Right. And a deep inner peace came over me for hours. Then it went away.
And that's the thing, is they're not permanent. And that's because we can't retain that permanency. But
right. Just like you, it's that experience that turned me into a seeker.
Yes. So I believe that's divine intervention. It doesn't matter what level it is, because it's really not a competition.
Right.
Because we're only given what we can handle. And my God, I wasn't ready for this. But obviously I was. So it's like, and I thought, why me? Far out. Why? I don't know anything. Oh my God,
And then 6 months, maybe 6 months after my Satori, I met a mystic.
Oh, wow. So the synchronicity, there you guided, you see, there comes the guidance.
Yeah.
So that affirms your experience as being valid.
And the interesting thing is, you mentioned mystics earlier in our conversation.
Yes.
The mystic I met became my mentor for 7 years.
This is very common. Yeah.
He did not give detail. He could have had the same experience as you for all I know, but he did not divulge anything. He was...
I know. The purpose, I think it's only in my opinion, but I think, yesterday someone mentioned a very close friend of mine who had a stroke recently, And I spoke to a young lad in England, and he said the same thing. He said, "Oh, look, this John, his name's John." He said, John won't give you the answer." I said, "Exactly." He said, "Because your mind is in a passive state. What he's trying to do is he's trying to put your mind into an active state by using rhetorical questions on your posit. So if you ask a question to the mystic will come back with a rhetorical to force you to think for yourself.
Right.
But you're on the ascent to the I am. This is the classic Moses, Moshe. Who sent you? I am. So if we can expand on that concept of what the I am is, and you need a lot of metaphysical background here on the structure of mind. So it wasn't just anybody can be I am. He could have been saying I am human,
Right.
or I am have reached the I am of who I really am, the divine nature of my structure of my soul. So these are very deep conversations that I think all mystics get to that point of I am. But of course, Moshe, in his particular role, much like Yeshua, they have a particular role where, Moses was a reluctant Messiah. Jesus, I don't know if he was reluctant. He knew who he was. So you've got to link, well, who are these? And I found out that most of these are titles. They're just titles for people who can wake up. So anyone can be a Yeshua. Anyone can be a Moshe.
Anyone could be a Buddha, and
Correct.
that
Correct.
was one of the things that attracted me to
Yes.
Gautama the Buddha, is that
Yes.
his teaching was, you can be me.
Correct. So what he's doing is he's actualizing your potential through the bodhisattva path, right?
Yep.
With the fruition of bodhisattva actions, eventually, if you can reach that expanded full Buddha nature, whether or not he's had nirvana or paranirvana, whatever, you get into these really, out there levels of enlightenment, which are fascinating, and they do, like a satori. There are equivalencies. And Japan actually was a Buddhist nation. I saw one of my past lives. I was a Shinto priest, but I was killed bringing Buddhism into Japan around 1200 AD. So, and then I had another lifetime there where I actually fulfilled my Shinto priest role. So I'm thinking, okay, I loved Japan. I liked they had a lot of animism connected to it and a lot of earth, energies, and everything was very nature oriented. Japan's a mystery. They've got a lot of Buddhist philosophy, and when you look at the structure of their symbolism, it's all there.
It's the Zen capital of the world.
Zen capital of the world. Yeah.
Is it safe to say that you're absolutely not scared of death because you know the cycle?
It's like it doesn't even enter my mind. And when you don't have that fear of death, illness can't creep in, because a lot of illness is triggered by stress and fear. And wherever that fear and stress goes in your body as a form of energy, and all of a sudden it goes to the weakest point. So if you've got a weakness in your lungs or your liver or an internal organ, I don't know, you're a doctor, right, by trade?
PhD in nutrition.
Nutrition, okay. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So what we're talking about is the interface between plant medicine, which is all plants, and our massive evolutionary biology. And so this is where I have good conversations with this molecular biologist, this professor of molecular biology, Beric. I mentioned him in my dedication. Beric was working on cancer. I mean, he was at Cambridge. He had an institute. He put many PhDs through. He's well known. I won't talk about him whilst he's not here, but in context, Beric's got a wealth of knowledge about, the minuscule structure of our biology. And it's, wow, I mean, it's over my head. It is so damned complex. It's a whole universe in there. So, when he starts talking about the movement of proteins, moving in and out of cell structures, and, they'd have to formulate experiments to do this. This is a world that's so far removed from the average populace. To me, hats off. I mean, and molecular biology is a very new field. I must admit, it's 20 years old, 25, 30 years old.
Right.
And it's really exploded in the last 3 decades. But even nutrition, I mean, this is interesting, because once you start to get into, Kabbalah comes into this in some, they've got a treatise on macrocosm, microcosm. They talk about the tree of life on an individual level, studying your own tree of life.
Right.
But you've got the macropotamus or whatever they call it. Then they see the tree of lives in the gestalt or the archetype. So you try to see where all the tree of lives are going. This is like the bigger picture. These envelopes happen in biology as well, like and even physics. Atom, you've got your threefold principle of neutron, electron, proton, but then it repeats in a bigger format. And once you start to recognize that repeat in bigger cycles and smaller cycles, you think, hang on, these are very, very informative patterns. Now, why I'm talking about that is food. We are made of food. Our biology, through billions of years, we are made of rocks. We're made of plant material. All of these things are solidified. So this is all just, on a denser scale.
Cosmos.
Cosmos, dust, you name it, you think, my God, I mean, and as with biology, the complexity of the systems in our body is phenomenal.
Oh yeah. I mean, your liver alone does over 400 functions.
Isn't that phenomenal? And yet,
Yeah.
even that's known in Kabbalah, they mention the liver, it's actually mentioned as one of the organs.
Mm-hmm.
And 400 is a sacred number as well. You've got 400 worlds in Kabbalah. So whether or not there's a link there numerologically, I don't know. I mean, a lot of mystics might know more about this than I.
Yeah, it's all linked. It's all, like Santos calls it, syncretism.
Yeah, syncretism. So with Santos's work, he talks about, I think he focuses quite heavily, I don't think it was his original work, but he focuses heavily on the epochs involved with the covenants. Like you've got the Abrahamic covenant, you've got the covenant that come after, which was, well, that was in the Abraham was in the ram, I think it was. Then you got Taurus, which was the shofar horn. With the Jewish, they have the shofar horn, so there's a lot of bull symbolism.
Yeah.
Christianity, you got a lot of fish symbolism, so you get into the zodiac of Pisces. And then we move into Aquarius. So with precession, you're moving backwards through the eons. So in each book in the Bible, you've got these epochs or 7 major cycles. Even the original Adamic, which this is when we start to get into who the Tem was. Scrolling right back to who this name Tem, and I found out it was Artem. It was an Egyptian god. I didn't know that at the time during my experience, but I was shown a lot of Egyptian stuff.
Mm.
So I'm thinking, well, who's this Artem? So I look it up, and it's all connected with an Egyptian deity.
Right.
So you know what I'm saying? So it's like we've got millions of deities, but I'm getting off track. I'm ranting a bit.
I feel like sometimes I feel like I know too much, and you know a lot. Santos knows a lot. A lot of people know a lot. But isn't it safe to say that really, we probably should just be quiet and calm and go inside of ourselves?
Well, ultimately, yes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yes. But
Yeah.
what happens is there seems to be we're not in control. I mean, this gets into choice versus predestiny. Okay, that's a big one,
It is.
philosophical. Do we have choice, or is it all predestined through prophecy, and it's all seen? Well, yes and no. Well, I get these visions sometimes. What's the point of getting them if I can't affect any change to prevent a negative, for example? So we have a choice to act on the information that we get. So my choice was to write a book and get it out into the public. Whereas before, I wasn't interested in writing a book. So yes, we have a choice. And that choice ultimately is to share this information in there that might be beyond my comprehension, where other people pick up and say, oh, that guy's hit a really interesting chunk or jigsaw piece here. And other people can expand on that. And that's the whole idea of sharing.
Yeah.
Is we can bounce off other people. I'm not charging, the world, or it's not, you know what I'm saying?
Right. No, share it's a very important
It's
word.
extremely important.
Yeah. Sharing is caring.
Podcasts, I mean, I was talking last night about the oral tradition, that whilst we're all stuck in this, digital age, and we're all, talking through internet and YouTube and these hubs that are slowly being centralized, and, algorithms are pushing certain information to the bottom, bringing other information to the top. Having a podcast talking like this ultimately is the Jesus covenant. Any two people in my name. Well, let's forget about the name aspect. But once you start sharing orally, communicating wisdom stories that I've experienced, I'm just offering you my experience. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. You offered me your Satori experience. You're not stating it's right or wrong, but I find a commonality.
Right.
So there's a double positive there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Listeners will listen to that and go, hey, I've had something like that. Triple, quadruple. So it's an expanding experience. You're expanding your oral tradition through open communication. I have nothing to hide and nothing to fear. I
Mm.
cannot fear death because there is no death. So therefore, my role is to share as much insight as possible whilst I'm in the guff in the vessel. And that frees me up from the prison of time. Because if this information transcends time and it goes beyond my mortality, it is performed the function that it was meant to do. That's what classics are about. This is why people like Plato and they're like Aristotle. I mean, this is what great minds do. They travel through time. So we use them as a benchmark. This is how we grow. Empirical data. This is how we grow.
Mm.
Yes, we're in a difficult time because there might be ideologies that conflict. That little iron out. God will sort that out. As you said, we go quiet. Sometimes we have to go quiet.
I think we have free will. I think that
Yes,
I think the Adam and Eve story is very, very, very powerful. I think
absolutely.
it is
Absolutely.
metaphorically on point.
Yes.
That reptile, that snake, could be looked at as society socially engineering us and trying to get us to go left when we really need to go right.
Are we active participants in it, though? How are we inputting into, and I would urge you to watch Dune Messiah coming up by Denis Villeneuve, which is a classic rewrite of the book by Frank Herbert, Dune. I mean, the original was done by Ridley Scott.
Okay.
That's a shamanic film. The worm, the giant sandworms on Arrakis or Arrakeen, they're your Kundalini. That's your Leviathan. You see,
Mm.
Leviathan's mentioned in Kabbalah as this giant serpent, and it weaves and takes a whole generation to swerve from left to right. That's mentioning. This is in Malkuth, in your lower sphere in Kabbalah. This is where the majority of consciousness is stuck in the beta Malkuth consciousness of Leviathan. So when you have, Paul, who's the messianic figure, he has to ride that worm. They're saying he's like the shaman who has to come up on the front of that wave for the next generation. So each generation has their worm rider, and you might have a couple of them. And they're out in the wilderness, classic John the Baptist,
Yeah.
classic Moses, classic Yeshua, all went out into the wilderness. And that mythology, as you said, coming through Adam and Eve, is part of our mythology of choice versus predestiny. And this is where the doctrine of Gilgul, its Kabbalistic doctrine of reincarnation through tikkun, the rectification, can only come through multiple rebirths, multiple reincarnations. This is taught in Judaism and esoteric Judaism, by the way. And I
Yeah.
mentioned this in my book that Gilgul's somehow separated from Christianity. And they don't have reincarnation in Christianity when it should, because Judaism has it. I'm not saying all Judaism has it,
Just
but
Kabbalah.
Kabbalah, that's right, there's esoteric. And I like the esoteric stuff because esoteric was oral tradition. You only got those insights by master-student relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more people talking. So if you've got any Jewish rabbis out there, hey guys, get in there and start to share this stuff. Get up
Yeah.
on podcasts and talk with Kevin here, because this is important stuff that Christians need to know to see where the roots of their religion came from, you know?
And they could learn a few things from like Meister Eckhart, but a lot of the saints too. Uh
Yes, yes. All of them.
Augustine and
Yes,
Paul.
they all made these realizations, right? They
Mhm.
made these realizations.
The kingdom of heaven is in us.
It's in us all the time.
And how about this is this might be the thing that stood out to me the most in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah,
Yeshua says the secret place. He's talking about it in the context of prayer.
yes.
But he's go to the secret place. The secret place. The secret place is what you're talking about. This is this is being able to go inside and see.
Yes. See, all those mansions are inside you. They're not external. They're not. And the other thing too is that the Vatican, 1600 years ago, through the Council of Nicaea, the two councils, they externalized everything into a post-death state. Now, if you study Kabbalah, you know that there's two main deaths. There's a lower death of the male ego, then there's a higher death of the female intuitive, and not much is known. It's called the second death. I don't know what they call it in Judaism. They would have a specific name for it. But once you understand that part, we understand that the second death, and both those deaths, mind you, the first death is by baptism. You take a path, to study, whether it be Meister Eckhart, or whatever. You're taking a spiritual path. So this primary death is the death of your ego, to
Right.
get into that active principle of choice to search for your own light. And see, most of the church system is stuck in a passive role of being told what to think rather than question and debate. Buddhism, they question and debate. They fight it out. They slap at each other and they slap their hands, and they have really vociferous debates,
Right.
and they tear down arguments. This has to be done for any sort of cognitive logic and narrative to actually come and get the essence. You've got to make the mind work. It's a muscle, and you've got to make that thing work. It's very important. And just when you get to an epiphany, don't think that's it. And so this is why when you reach that, really these great states of satori or insights, if you want to springboard and grow, you got to go back. And quantum physics is real here. You go back to that point event, you feel it in your meditation, you go back to it, you expand on it, and you take yourself back to that time, because there is no time. So what you're doing is you're linking up to your own experience of that epiphany. So Kevin here and Kevin back there 10 years later, or 10 years before, you link back to the experience, and it empowers your energetic field or your subtle body system again. And that way you can lift by recreating the experiment. It's an experiment in science. Yeah. And if you get the same similar epiphany, then you're on the road to enlightenment. Aha, there's your aha moment. So there's no time, and this is the illusion, is we're stuck in time. This is what happened from the fall. When we ate from the fruit, Eve, the feminine, passive, receptive, on Chokmah, I think they call it, on the pillar of mildness. She's up there in absolute. Ketha, Chokmah, Bina, Chokmah, feminine, passive, Bina, masculine, active. So here she gets the serpent enticing her, and it says, hey, eat the fruit down here. There's plenty of fruit on the lower branches. No, but God says don't eat that fruit. No, but come on. Your eyes will be opened, and you'll see like the gods, And so, of course, she does. She eats the fruit. And the very next thing is she offers it to Adam. So what they've done is the scribes have genderized it as a male and a female. No, these are archetypes in everyone's mind. It's not a male-female thing. It's because people don't understand the archetypal attributes of the higher spheres and the twin pillars. And so when Adam and Eve both fall out of the supernal triad, which is the three upper fruit on the tree of life, they fall down past the veil and they fall into time below Saturn, because Saturn is attributed to Beria, the second world, So we fall into time. That's what happened. We fell into time. I mentioned that in my book, Kevin, that the punishment, or the original term of hell, El is Hair, the god of endlessness and infinity, Egyptian god, and El is Saturn. So you fell into time. So all of the brutal rites of circumcision and all of these brutal rites were designed to push your consciousness up out of time, to get into this expansive mansion, of absolute.
It's a great
That's
term.
where the Garden of Eden is.
That's
where the
term.
Garden of Eden is.
Expansion mansion. I love that term.
Expansion mansion. And so it's like, once you have the expansion mansion, I mean, you can patent that if you like. I like it too. So once you have that expansion mansion, you're opening up, and you're getting out of time. You're actually levitating and transcending. You are ascending. And we've heard the New Age, we're going to be raptured by the church or ascend. It's all the same language. You're lifting up. You're being lifted up. And that fulfills scripture to a T.
Mm.
through the marriage theology, where the
Yeah.
Messiah comes back, and there's this merging or this marriage, you know, of virginal consciousness marriages with concepts of archetype. It's all the same in Buddhism,
It,
you know,
it really is.
Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity. It's all there, but the problem is we're fighting over the semantic. Yes.
I want your short answer on this.
Okay.
Do you think there will be a reemergence of extraterrestrials? Will they come back around?
There
And
has
will
to be.
yeah,
Absolutely, because we haven't fully evolved. We're just now coming out of the violent teenage state. We're running rampant, destroying each other. We're in lockdown.
right.
We don't know how to treat each other. We've been given divine laws from very advanced species. These divine laws work with us on a metaphysical level that we've had for eons since the beginning. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to find our grown-up self, our
But
wisdom mind.
we, us, and the ETs were all still under the same source, same God.
We are under the same source. So I have no doubt they're here to help us. There's stories of ETs trying to trap us and destroy us. Listen, these things, they can travel freaking light years in an instant. They have powers, that could destroy this planet in seconds if they need be, I'm sure. But they're still under the law, the cosmological law of the one. So they might be they might be a million years advanced technologically, but spiritually, they're there, and they're trying to help us. They're trying to help us get ourselves out of this mess. And
Right.
we are like naughty kids with atomic bombs, and we're doing stupid stuff, and we're trashing the very nest that we need for survival.
Mm.
They've come to help, and they intervened. We've had a 30-year soft intervention. That's in my opinion only. That's what my book is partially about. I mention that we were created by them. So they've got a vested interest to unblock this blockage that we've got down here on so many levels, this toxicity.
Mm.
So they don't want to usurp our choice, Kevin. And this is a really interesting thing. We have to want to choose to evolve. Now, if we choose to evolve on a personal level, we'll die and we'll reincarnate when the greater evolution, the collective evolution, reaches that point where we can reincarnate again and keep moving forward.
Right.
That's what the rectification or tikkun through Gilgul is all about, getting back to it. And it won't be the same Eden that we left. It can't possibly be the same Eden. We'll be a very aged Adam and a very old Eve sitting in a rocking chair going, damn, did we stuff that up? It only took us 400,000 years to stuff it.
Mm.
And then, you know what I mean? That's when we'll do nothing. We'll just sit back in the rocking chair and say, well, let's not touch it for a while and just let God do its work.
Right.
Let the plants grow, let everything go back to organic structures again, no pesticides, all of that.
Right.
It's important. And I think the ETs were helping us the best way they could without causing a panic. Because can you imagine if they had intervened physically with ships everywhere, people would have committed suicide. Negative karmic imprint there.
Yeah.
I'll just do what I'm always doing. I've just been me and I live in the moment. I paint, I'm an artist. Sales are crap. It'd be nice if I sold a bit more. But we'll see. I trust in spirit that I trust that much in spirit that I'm right where I'm meant to be at any given time. It's
Right.
all the power is right here now in this podcast. It's like nothing else exists but this podcast. You and me talking and just rapping about Mike Tyson on his bloody toad poison, and
That's
I
right.
mean that's just. Geez, I hope Mike listens to this podcast. I think this is hilarious. But man, I mean, it's like, to me, anybody has these amazing epiphanies. They're
Yes.
worth talking about because this is about becoming naked again. So we're in the Garden of Eden metaphorically right now.
Yes.
Sharing, you're not Jewish, Christian, whatever. I'm not Jewish, Christian. I'm just John, and I'm just this dude who's had this experience. And I'm happy I've had it.
Yeah.
Jesus, when I had it, it really screwed my relationships up and friendships. It did it ever. Mad Johnny, he's seen extraterrestrials, and it just went on. I mean, I had contact as well, and that'd be good for another podcast. I go into great in depth about those contacts. physically been on a ship. Yeah, yeah. So if listeners are listening,
You're a
I've got
10-hour podcast, John.
damn. I mean, but it's important because it's a humbling experience. It's like I'm exposing myself and becoming naked to being powerless. You know,
It's
I
a
don't have any power. These events
it's a
make you powerless.
surrender.
Correct. It's a
That's the
surrender.
Yeah, that's the term right there.
And
Surrender.
there's this bigger river going on, and you've got to surrender to that river because if you don't, you're
Hey,
like you get
the
smashed.
the most important song of all time. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
That's right.
Merrily, merrily, merrily,
Yeah,
merrily. Life is
life is
but a
but a dream.
dream.
Correct.
There it is
So,
right there.
so the natives sing about a canoe in that respect. Row, row, row your canoe, but it's like it's true. Yeah, the true canoe. I mean, we collectively have the answer because collectively we're connected to deity. So
Yeah,
it all
we're all the same. We're
as
all
it
part of the
yeah,
whole.
as it all it'll unfold, whether it's via choice or whether it's predestined. We choose to either love God and love each other now or later. That's the only choice that's the conclusion I came up to in the end. I can choose to love one another now or later. And there's your two missing mitzvahs to any rabbis who are actually listening to this. They have 113 mitzvahs. There's originally 111, but they've pinched two of the mitzvahs from the Mosaic Law. Well, which two do you pick? Number 1 and 2, or 2 and 5, or 3 and 9, or no? The two mitzvahs are in Matthew 22, 37, 39, and the famous Jewish rabbi called Yeshua came up and said, "Love God, love your neighbor." They're the two missing mitzvahs. So it merges the Old and New Testament. This is going to be hard to handle. It's
Hmm.
going to be hard to handle because it's a covenant shift. It's a covenant merge and shift level.
And for the listeners that don't know, Yeshua is Jesus the
Yes,
Christ.
yes. But even the term Yeshua, yeah, Ush or Shu is the god of wind in ancient Egypt. The Y or the letter Y is Yud. Yeshu R is moon goddess. You get back to Shekinah again. So all of these broken syllables are
Hmm.
ancient Egyptian syllables. And there's I'll promote one book here, one Kabbalist. Her name's Leonora Leet, PhD. I'd recommend getting some of her work. I'm plowing through her books. They're very heavy. She links all the ancient Aramaic texts and Hindu language to Judaism. So she's linking common words in a lot of the deities, like Ishtar, Unit Pishtim was Sumerian god. So this Ish goes back to Ush, which is an Egyptian god. So this is a completely other tangent. It's a very long philological, etymological link. This is the stuff I've been digging into.
Right.
So, but
Well, I don't think I've ever met anyone that would enjoy the tiger's fang as much as you, John.
I'm going to write that down. The Tiger's Fang.
Yeah, it's a
But
special book.
amazing. I mean, I will look it up. And like I said, for any of the listeners, my book God's Mountain,
Yes.
which is an interesting. Took me 8 years to put together. I didn't, as I said, I'm
Wow.
not an author. But it was 30 years experience, 27 years of reclusive experience. And it wasn't until 2012 that I decided to write the book because I'd done some interviews with a Dr. Evie Richardson on Caribbean Radio, which is still out there on the net. You can still
Hmm.
search John Scott NDE. So I thought it was just going to be an 18-month task. Was I so wrong, man? I ended up spending 8 years on that thing. I felt far out. So hats off to anyone who can write a book. It's hard work.
Yeah.
Um, Getting
I,
threads together. It was a real challenge for me.
I've written 5
Wow. Okay.
and more to come.
Yes.
It comes easy to me for some reason, but you know, I don't know
I
how to.
think some people are gifted. Some people are gifted writers. They really are. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's if I was able to get that PhD, I mean, you could do anything.
Well, I've heard any PhD. Hats off to them. It's hard. I mean, you've got to really,
Yeah,
really
yeah,
do the hard yards.
yeah.
And it's like,
There's moments where you want to slam your head against the wall, you know.
I bet, I bet, I bet. Because I know a few PhDs, and I'll tell you what, they're very quiet. And I don't know if they're burnt out. I don't know if they're burnt out from so much intellectual ramming and churning it out.
Because it's memorization. It's
Yeah,
it's it's
yeah.
not it's not wisdom.
That's interesting.
Now,
That's
the
interesting.
story you said about your stories, and that's wisdom because it's your experience.
Correct. And I think that's kind of interesting that I was put into that experience. So I'm not talking through my hat from and quoting someone else. I've read other people. In fact, I haven't read any NDEs except Eben Alexander's, and I've seen a couple on YouTube. I'm not interested in them because I know mine was the most powerful. But then, excuse me, but then when I see the commonalities, ultimately it's love. Ultimately, there's no barriers or boundaries. And ultimately, they're saying similar things. You know, when you look for the commonality or the structure, the commonality of the experience, any experience that's trying to split us up or divide us is not really, that's the only one I shy away from. I don't judge it, I just shy away from it because it's exclusive, not inclusive.
Right.
And it's not about losing your identity to someone else's religion. No, it's about actually accepting that their religion might actually be right. It's just written in a semantic structure for a basic primate. You know, we are primates. We communicate with oral, vocal. These entities communicate direct mind to mind, which is going to be a more advanced approach for communication. Telepathy, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more open
It's
and
the
fast.
speaking of the religions. I mean, look, Lao Tzu called it the way. Buddha
Lao
called it the
Tzu,
way.
yes,
Jesus called it the way.
yes,
It's just the
yeah.
way.
It's the way. It's a pathway. Yeah. In Buddhism, they call it a yana. It's a yana. It's a river. I mean, Native Americans, they have the Wakantanka and Tunkashla. That is their way, connecting
Mhm.
through the grandfathers.
Yeah.
Indigenous Aboriginals here, same thing. They have family lineage.
Right.
So it's like this is Maori in New Zealand, same again. So I'm looking for the disconnect. Where have we disconnected from the spirit world? That's what I'm looking at. And how do we reconnect to our own experience as the reconnect?
Mm.
Anybody tries to disconnect you from your own spiritual Gnostic experience, get rid of them out of your life. You've got to connect to your own dreams, your own synchronicities, your own Satori, your own out of body, your own NDE. It's yours. You came in alone. You're going to die alone. And anything that happens in between is for you. The fear of fear is the only thing to worry about. You get beyond that. I think it's fantastic when it's dark because that's where the real potential is.
Well, that's when we really see, right? Because
Yeah,
we can't see the stars during the day.
that's right. Exactly. That's right. Where have they
And
gone? Where have they gone?
and Santos brought this up on our podcast. He said lack, take the B away. It's
There you go. Yeah, lack of light.
It's lack. So it's the black light you want to go towards. And you said
Yes,
it in your story that you went into the black void.
that was that void. That was the scariest part. But once you get past that, now, for any listeners out there, people are worried about, I haven't had an NDE and I'll never, don't worry, we're all going through one now.
Hmm.
What happens to the individual mystic or whatever, and I don't call myself a mystic by any means, but what happened to me, I can see it unfolding out there now. We're heading into darkness. We're going into the void as a collective, right? So
Yeah.
internal, external, upper, lower, it's all of these planes of existence will all coalesce into a singularity. And this is what this event is, or this thing we're all worried about. Don't be worried. Be like a child and just open your heart up. You won't be hurt if you're being honest and you keep it real, you know?
The guru that's my advisor, if you will, my what was the word you used? Guidance counselor, if we're using the school
Yeah.
analogy.
Supervisor, yeah,
He says that enlightenment is essentially a black hole, just like in space, just like the scientists
absolutely.
discovered in space.
Yes,
It's going through a black hole and
yes.
you're imploding. You're imploding.
You're losing all your mass and you're losing the sense of self, which is classic Newtonian physics.
Mm.
You have to dump the mass until eventually, what are you left with? A photon, which is your soul. And a photon's meant to be massless. And that's the only thing that can pass through a black hole, right? Well, supposedly. This is the big question. What happens to photons when they enter black holes? We don't know because they go past the singularity, past the point event of being able to observe it. So they can only see peripheral activity. I mean, just recently, and I mentioned this in my book, the the black hole that they took a photo of, NASA M87 in constellation of Virgo, it was a big fiery ring. It was a portal to another world, and I show how Ahura Mazda, was in the little portal, and the rings is all in my book visually. So here we are, we are a light body, and we're all going to have to go through a black hole. And of course, this is a bit scary because people, once you hit fear, people's animal nature reacts in a way that is, they get scared, they lash out, they get violent, they do stupid things. So it's the one who can step back, watch the watcher, and not just be and connect with your intuition, because that's all you're going to have. Because once we hit that void, there's going to be a lot of like, what happens next? No, we always look to gurus to move generations forward. When we run out of those gurus and it's completely black, and I think from memory, this is one of the plagues in the Bible, is the days of darkness.
We need
they're
the
talking about
gurus.
spiritual darkness. When you have spiritual darkness, look out. That's more scary than any bloody coronavirus in China. Spiritual darkness is frightening because you're rudderless, you're anchorless. You don't know where you are, and when that's really, and you only have you as your point of reference. I'm talking about you as in 7 billion people out there. People, that's all they have. They have their beliefs. They have their point of reference of I or me. But when that gets destroyed through this burning off of passing through these portals, we'll see how you feel then. It's not I'm not sort of getting all, lightning bolts here, but if you don't have a sense of who you are spiritually, then it can be quite problematic. And it doesn't matter how intellectual, how well educated, or what status we have. We all have the same deep, innate need to be loved. Yeah, that's ultimately what we want. So we're searching for that absolute. Everybody on an unconscious level is looking for it. That's what I realized when I came out of my ND. I thought I was looking for it all my life. I was looking for that, and it happened. I was lost, dark. And finally the light came and dragged me out and showed me. I think that's we've wrapped it up.
Yeah, that's it, John. This might be my longest. I'll definitely have some editing to do, but it's all worth it.
Awesome.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope I haven't disappointed.
No, not at all. For all the listeners, be sure to go on Amazon and get John Scott's book called God's Mountain, and find him on Facebook and go say hi. If you're looking for my work, you can go to drreese.com. That's doctor spelled out. And I'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese. If this episode opened your heart, feel free to share on social media and tell your loved ones. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, may peace be with you.